And Peter, please proffer me an explanation of this. As Freddie explained in the story, in early 2024, California's budget, again, fell short of its expected revenue. Mr. Environmentalist Gavin Newsom proposed major cuts to climate projects, including reducing funding for wildfire prevention and forest resilience by $100 million and cutting funding to all climate programs by 7%. Why would he do that at the same time he's giving massive tax subsidies to real estate developers, massive breaks to apparently the fossil fuckers? That doesn't really seem consistent if Gavin Newsom, who's consistently says we have a climate emergency.
Well, I don't think I'm breaking any news headlines here, but Gavin Newsom is running for president in 3 years, and he is lining up all of his rich corporate donors and letting them know, much like his good friend Joe, nothing will fundamentally change either if I get elected president of the United States. It's really that simple. But the environmental disasters, and I'm over in Florida, Freddie, so I'm on the other coast, and what is wildfires is the catastrophe that you deal with on a regular basis in Southern California. You know, we obviously have to deal with hurricanes. And so when you heat up the water, when you heat up the air and the land, it becomes a lot harder to deal with these environmental problems and they become more prevalent. I think the angle that isn't being talked about enough regarding these wildfires is that this is happening in January. It's not like this is happening in July. This is happening in what is supposed to be the coldest month of the fucking year. Excuse my language, but I'm at the point now where I just
Tina told me in LA it was 80 degrees. I think on Saturday it's typically 55 to 65. So it's 80
There's
degrees.
100-mile-an-hour winds too.
Yeah,
100-mile-an-hour winds the night the fire just ripped out of control. And, right now, I mentioned this in the story. There's 35 wildfires burning across California right now as we speak. Yeah.
It's not just one fire. The only reason why they're talking about the Palisades fire, for those of you who don't know, the A-list crowd of Hollywood lives in the Pacific Palisades. That's where Arnold lives and a lot of other people of that level of prominence.
Billy Crystal lost his home,
Yeah, that's why they talk about it. They don't give a shit about the people that are in Whittier or in Reseda and places like that. Hollywood, not the Hollywood Hills, the rest of Hollywood where working people live, they don't care about that shit. That doesn't matter. Yeah. What matters is who has the bread and who makes the world go round. And so the so-called A-list celebrities are the ones who are catching all the attention right now. I even saw that story about that guy whose last name happened to be Wasserman. Talk about coincidence. Rich guy, apparently like a major crypto investor of some kind, and or real estate investor, brags about not paying any taxes. And this guy's out there saying, hey, can I get a private fire truck to come up and put out the fire on my house? Because, I'm more important than the average person. So we have to take care of us. But this environmental catastrophe in California, you can't ignore it anymore. And I'm not saying that it's going to lead to like a Republican sweep in California, but electorally speaking, something has to be done because there's obviously so many layers to this. There's the Resniks with the privatization of the water supply. There's so many different areas that are not being discussed. It all comes to a head because you're in such a catastrophe right now. The problem is that this is something, and I'm sure you could speak to it better than either Jordan or I can. This is something that people have been talking about for a long time, that you're literally playing with not just any kind of fire, but with like apocalyptic fire. We have a serious problem, whether it's with the brush, whether it's with temperature rises, things of that nature, and that eventually something of this catastrophic nature was going to hit Southern California at some point. So people acting all shocked should not be. This has been talked about forever, and now it finally happened. And it could have easily been prevented. Well, I'm not saying it could have been totally prevented, but there's a lot of measures that could have been done that could have made this less of a problem.
And Freddie, go ahead.
Yeah, just, real quick, like, where there's fires burning, like I mentioned earlier, it's extremely dry area, super, super hilly area, an area that is, it's in Southern California. So Southern California and Northern California have vastly different types of ecosystems, right? Down there, very dry, desertish at times. Even on the coast, it's more desertous than it is I'm in Northern California. We have redwoods on our coast up here. Redwoods require a bunch of water. And so a lot of the times when you see these wildfires in California, they're usually during the summertime. They're usually in Northern California, and they're usually hundreds of thousands, if not, peaking into the near millions of acres. So for this fire to, and they're also very rarely in urban areas. And so for this wildfire to break out in an urban area in July really highlights the fire dangers of year-round in California. And exactly what Peter had mentioned, there have been warnings about these fires and the potential for these fires to pop off. And in particular in Southern California during the wintertime, which is, I saw people mention in the chat, the Santa Ana winds. Those are winds that come from the desert, come from the east to the west, whereas typically you get them from the west to the east, which happens most of the time of the year. But this time of year, they come from the east to the west. They get super dry as they dry out over the desert, and they just rip through LA. Usually what's happened is, it's happening right now. Low pressure system sits over the Pacific, brings down cooler air, which affects where I'm at. And then you have a high pressure system that sits over the more desert areas, like northern Mexico into New Mexico and in Arizona, pushing that, and those winds just rip straight through the Los Angeles area. And that's what's fueling, some of these fires right now.